Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to decode a massive 4,500-year-old archaeological mystery using nothing but microscopic clues. The Indus Valley Civilization holds secrets that researchers are really only just beginning to uncover. In this breakdown, we're going to see how tiny chemical signatures buried deep inside ancient human remains are completely rewriting the history of one of the world's very first great urban societies.
Okay, let's dive right into this. How do you actually solve a cold case from 4,500 years ago using literally nothing but a single human tooth? Well, today we're playing forensic detective, and we're investigating a truly fascinating ancient urban anomaly. We'll be digging into the absolute latest bioarchaeological data to figure out exactly who was living and dying in these ancient megacities. To start, we have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the greater Indus region. We're talking about a massive ancient civilization that spanned across modern-day Pakistan and northwest India during the 3rd millennium BC. It was a vast landscape, estimated to be up to 1 million square kilometers. This was a sprawling, dynamic network of cities, entirely built on extensive river and overland trade routes. Now, what's truly fascinating is how this society actually functioned. Unlike ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, this society wasn't built by violent military conquest. Instead, it was decentralized. Power was shared and contested among different competing groups. Think of these elites as essentially shopping around. They were negotiating alliances to get the absolute best deals on exotic resources like copper, steatite, and precious stones from the surrounding highland regions. But this brings us to a massive, glaring anomaly. During this urban zenith, millions of people lived in these massive Indus centers. Yet, at major excavated sites like Harappa, Kalibangan, and Farmana, archaeologists have only found a few hundred formal cemetery burials. That's it. The vast majority of the population was likely cremated or disposed of in ways that leave absolutely zero archaeological trace. So you have to ask yourself, who were these rare few chosen for a formal burial? Let's get into Section 1, the Forensic Toolkit, Cracking the Enamel. Now, what's really interesting about this is how researchers actually go about getting answers. They turn to bioarchaeology to find a sort of biological passport. This relies heavily on isotopes, which are basically atoms of the same element that just have varying atomic masses. As a person eats, drinks, and breathes, these isotopes get permanently locked into human tissues, acting like a chemical stamp that perfectly reflects the exact environment they were exposed to during their life. So let's break down exactly what this toolkit looks like in practice. On the one hand, you've got your heavy isotopes, like strontium and lead. These are basically your precise geographic fingerprints because they don't change as they move from the local bedrock into dust, plants, and eventually humans. On the other hand, light isotopes, like oxygen and carbon, undergo changes that reveal incredibly specific details about the local climate, water sources, and diet. Here is how that chemical passport is actually formed. Step 1. The local environment holds its own very distinct isotope ratios. Step 2. Those isotopes get locked into tooth enamel during early childhood, up to about 14 years of age. And step 3, because different teeth mineralize at different stages of growing up, analyzing multiple teeth from a single person reveals a timeline. It literally tracks a person's geographic movement from birth right through early adolescence. Moving on to Section 2, a rare burial tradition, the big reveal. When we apply this forensic toolkit to those highly exclusive graves, we see just how strict and normative the burial program was. These weren't just random graves. They were intentionally located hundreds of meters outside the living areas. Bodies were laid extended, facing up, with their heads always pointing north. They were accompanied by modest pottery and very limited personal ornaments, like shell bangles for females. Plus, osteological data shows these people were relatively healthy with low rates of disease. Clearly, this was a highly specific social group receiving highly structured treatment. And here is the massive, game-changing breakthrough from the isotope data. The analysis of remains from Harappa, Farmana, and Sonoli led researchers to an absolutely astonishing conclusion. Urban-era Indus cemetery burials were reserved exclusively for participants in a structured institution of immigration. No way, right? The data strongly suggests these buried individuals were not locals. They were likely all immigrants born completely outside the alluvial plains, migrating to these cities as children. Let's move to and see how this builds across the grand timeline of this civilization to really understand the scale of it all. It kicks off with the regionalization era, where emerging polities start taking shape. Then we hit the integration or urban era around 2600 BC. This is when the cities and this elite immigrant burial tradition hit their absolute zenith. Finally, we see the localization or post-urban era beginning around 1900 BC, which marks the decline and dispersion of these grand cities. When you look at the geography, during that integration era, the Harappan culture spanned a massive, incredibly unified extent. But as we shift into the localization era, things fracture. As the major urban centers declined, that once integrated, unified culture dispersed into much smaller, localized groups, each with their own entirely different material cultures. So why on earth were children migrating into these massive cities in the first place? Well, it was all about maintaining that sprawling network. The data points towards an institution of fosterage. Highland and lowland groups were likely trading children, sending them to live in allied communities to forge absolutely crucial kinship and trade ties. By fostering these kids, Harappan elites locked in a reliable, steady flow of vital mineral resources into their decentralized power structures. It was a brilliant strategy. That brings us to our final part, Section 3, the modern connection, shifting landscapes. This shifting landscape is what ultimately spelled the end for these megacities. You've probably heard those old theories about a violent Aryan invasion destroying these settlements, but the data clarifies that simply isn't true. Instead, the cities slowly transformed and dispersed due to a changing climate and weakening monsoons starting around 1900 BC. As the environment aridified, agricultural systems had to adapt, and those old urban power structures just fell apart. That completely ended the need for this highly specific elite immigrant trait network. Which leaves us with a pretty powerful, provocative thought to consider. If an ancient, sprawling civilization was literally built and sustained by networks of immigrants forging alliances across entirely different landscapes, what does that say about the DNA of our modern cities? It shows us for sure that migration, integration, and the blending of cultural identities aren't just modern phenomena, they are the very foundations of human urban existence. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history beneath your feet.